Okay, so hopefully you've learned quite a bit from the previous lecture. And this lecture, we are taking a look at the major forms of government out there. We're going to take a look at what they look like and the differences between these forms of government. Now, why is this important? It's because government takes care of the masses and government implements policies. Government has significant impact on the masses in many ways, economically, politically, socially, culturally, and the list is long. Government enacts laws and enforces laws, and depending on the type of government, you will have oppressive laws or you have democratic laws or laws that respect human rights. And also, the type of government is directly correlated to the standard of living and the quality of life of the citizens of that country. That's why this is important. So we're going to take a look at this a bit more closely and have a better understanding. All right, so the learning outcomes for today is we're going to understand what democracy is, democracy as a concept, democracy as practice. We're going to understand that. We're going to understand what monarchy is. What is monarchy and how does it fit into this whole structure and framework of governance? And we're also going to take a look at oligarchy, right? And this is a very interesting type of government as well. And we're going to take a closer look to see how it interfaces with the people. And finally, we're going to take a look at the totalitarian and authoritarian forms of government and also have a better understanding of how they impact their citizens. All right, let's take a closer look. All right, so it says here, it's a system of government where the citizens, right, and this is represented by the masses, of course, right, citizens, masses, choose their leaders or representatives through elections, right? Now, this is a very simple definition, but it has quite a bit of meaning and is very impactful in the sense that the power then lies in the hands of who? The citizens, right? So power, in this case, equals to citizens, right? Is in the hands of citizens. Power is not in the hands of the government, but in the hands of the citizens. So what does that mean? Power is not in the hands of government. Now you may say, what do you mean? Government is the one that enacts policies and enforces policies, throws people into prison and so forth. That is correct. But they can't do any of that if the people don't give them the power to do so, right? The people don't give them the power to do so, the government is powerless. And that's why the people can recall the government at any time, right? People can come together and recall the government anytime. They can impeach the government, impeach the president or an elected leader anytime. They can instigate a vote of no confidence in their leaders and dissolve government, etc. That's why the people are important. And that's why democracy is a very, very important form of government, because the power lies in the people. Now, the idea of democracy is let the people decide. Let them decide who their leaders will be, right? So it shouldn't be a forced endeavor. Let the people decide who their leaders will be. And this is, again, very important because the people deciding who their leader will be is directly connected to their human rights and the ability to function in society and to exercise their human rights to choose who leads the government. And that's where majority comes in. So in a democracy, it's usually majority, right? So majority vote, right, usually carries the day, so to speak. Carries the day, right? So majority vote carries the day, so to speak. Because the idea of democracy then is the more people want something, the more they move towards achieving, the more it makes sense for whatever it is to be prevalent, to be the item of choice and so forth. Now, it doesn't always mean that what the majority wants is good. It doesn't always mean that. Now, we have many examples throughout history that will illustrate this point. But nevertheless, in a democratic setting, within the frame of democracy, the majority wish is usually what carries the day. And that's why democracy is a favored form of government, because it suggests that the people are the ones deciding, the people are the ones that empower the government, the people are the ones that give the government mandate, right? Let's take note of this word here, mandate. And the mandate is so important because when it comes from the people, it is legitimate, right? It's a legitimate mandate. This is legitimate. It's a legitimate mandate because it's coming from the people. The people have authorized this mandate and it's coming from them. So democracy then is a system. Let's clean this up and have a, let's clean this up. So democracy then is a government, it's a system of government where the citizens choose, and this is the key word here. This is the key word here. One, to choose their leaders or representatives through election. This is another keyword, third keyword, through elections. Not by military coup, not by insurrection and what have you, or revolution, but through elections. And we can also add through free and fair elections, credible elections. It's important to take note of this. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So it says here, usually those who are eligible to vote periodically vote to elect their leaders. Now, it's important for us to highlight this word, elect, and this word eligible, right? Now, why is that important? Because you have to be eligible. That means there are conditions in democracy. There are conditions for you to vote. And depending on the country, the condition could be age. We are talking about citizens within that space. So age could be one. Mental status could be another. And also criminal record, right? This is also important. Criminal record could be another. So it's conditional, right? It's conditional. So voting is conditional. Participating in the voting process is conditional. And again, based on where you are, the conditions may vary. All right. So again, usually those who are eligible to vote periodically to elect their leaders. So the mandate is not forever. If it's forever, it's not a democracy. It has to be renewed. It has to be renewed, right? Periodically. It could be 4 years, could be 5 years, could be 6 years, whatever the case may be. This is also known as government by the people, for the people, right? So government by the people, not for the government, but for the people. That's what makes democracy a very interesting and unique form of government, because it suggests that the government is formed by the people, for the people. Examples are the United States, UK, Japan, South Africa, Brazil, Jamaica, and others, many others. All of these countries practice democracy. Now, it doesn't mean they're perfect. Doesn't mean that they have it all figured out. But they practice one form of the other of democracy, right? So Jamaica has a parliamentary system of government where they elect a prime minister. The United States has a presidential system of government where they elect a president, they directly elect a president, right? And so it's important for us to make these distinctions and to understand the underpinning of this concept of democracy within the frame of government and within the context of government. Next slide. So the next form of government is monarchy. And monarchy is by royals, it's ruled by royals, right? Usually kings, queens, as we've seen in Queen Elizabeth, who ruled for decades and decades and decades, and prince, right, and princesses, usually, right? There could be other names as well, right? So monarchy then is ruled by these groups of people. It's a system of government where the monarch, king or queen, usually is the head of state and ruler, right? So what does that mean really? Because it means here that the king or the queen is the one, with the sovereign power, is the one making rules, is the one leading, is the one that is in charge of affairs of that country. And some countries have that today. We can go to Eswatini in Southern Africa, where the king is ruling. And we have other examples. Saudi Arabia is ruled by a monarch. And we have countries like Morocco and Jordan, where the monarchy is very prominent, etc. And countries around the world, some Western countries as well, where the monarchy is very active, right? So it's a system of government where the monarch, king or queen, usually is the head of state and the ruler. And usually that happens when there's a weak governmental system. When there's a weak governmental system, it makes room for royals to emerge, and sometimes it makes room for military to emerge as well, right? It makes room for, different, variations of government, mostly not supported by the masses, to emerge and take control of affairs. So monarchy has come to stay, as we have witnessed many countries around the world, practicing monarchy in one form or the other. Sometimes in some of those countries, the monarchy is a titular head, which means they are just ceremonial. In other countries, they're very active and very powerful. All right, let's take a look at this closely in the next slide. So the monarchy is not elected, right, and usually inherits the position. They rule by inheritance, right? So it's passed on from one generation to the other, as we saw with Queen Elizabeth, taking on the role and again being in office for decades and decades and decades, right? So they are not elected, but they inherit their role and their position inherits. Example of countries ruled by monarchs are Eswatini, as we said earlier, in Southern Africa, right? And Jordan and Morocco and Saudi Arabia and many more. All right, these countries ruled by monarch, and the monarchy then is really in most cases is very closed, close-knit family that has usually a very rich and very powerful, and power goes from the father to the son and the father to the daughter, and so forth, etc. So it's very exclusive and very exclusive endeavor here. All right, let's go to the next slide. So oligarchy is another form of government. Now, this is a very interesting form of government because you don't often hear about this, but it's very much present in today's system of government. And here then we have the question, what is oligarchy? And it's a government by the few, usually wealthy, who exercise power without regards to the needs of the people. This is significant because oligarchy is really not in the interest of the people as defined, because the elite, right, take advantage of the people, right? It's often the elite versus the people, right? The people. And the elite take advantage of the people. They're wealthy and they own the factories, they own the means of production. And because they own the factories and the means of production, and let's put those here as well. So means of production, right? This is production, and they have the economic leverage, right? They have the economic leverage. And because they have the economic leverage, they're able to manipulate the masses, manipulate the population, and have their way, right? So oligarchy is a government by the few, usually wealthy, who exercise power without regards to the needs of the people. And they are very wealthy because they've exploited the people. And let's put that here, right? So the wealth equals to exploitation for the most part. They exploited the people, right? Exploitation, right? Exploited the people and, taking resources, right? They've taken resources away from the land, from the people, and use those resources to their advantage. That is usually what it means when we talk about oligarchy and the oligarchs, right? Sometimes they are known as the oligarchs, and they have yachts, they have private jets, they have fleets of cars, they have mansions, and they have, domestic, helpers in those mansions and so forth. And this is usually not a good system in the grand scheme of things. Why? Because it doesn't take the needs of the people into account. It doesn't take the needs of the people into account. And that's a very important point to understand, right? So here they want to begin to understand how this works, how it plays out, and how it impacts the people in a very, very negative way. And here he says, exercise power, right, without regards to the needs of the people. And this is where there is usually revolution, right? There's usually revolution, uprising by the people because they've been oppressed for a long time. They've been deprived of human rights for a long time. And this kind of government embodies human abuse, usually does not recognize, human rights. They are very, very anti, demonstration, protest, to express opinion, a different view, etc. And they're very repressive. They're very repressive. So let's take a look at this a bit more closely in the next slide. Okay, so it says here, it is often characterized by corruption, despotic tendencies, and oppressive laws as they seek to consolidate power. As they who, right, the oligarchs, right? The oligarchs, right, the oligarchs seek to consolidate power. And that's what they do. Because once you get power, it's very difficult to give it up. It's very difficult to compromise that power. And what you have then is continuous oppression and continuous human rights abuse and what have you. The ruling class, the oligarchs, right, usually display their power through their wealth, and this is known as plutocracy, right? So it's important to understand this term as well. Plutocracy, what does that mean? It means that when they display their wealth, when these oligarchs display their wealth in a very reckless way and shove it into the faces of the masses, whom they have exploited, whom they have, some of the masses, some of the members of the masses, working for them, working long hours without really, respectable, livable pay, working long hours, days and days and days to enrich the oligarchs. And so this is a very interesting form of government that, as we said previously, gives rise to revolutions and insurrections and violent tendencies. Because when you oppress people for a long time, natural reaction is to fight back because they have nothing to lose at that point. All right, so oligarchy is often characterized by corruption, despotic tendencies, and oppressive laws as they seek to consolidate power. The ruling class, the oligarchs, usually display their power through their wealth, and this is known as plutocracy. Now, please take note of this word, right? We'll see it again as we move on and begin to understand the different ideologies when it comes to forms of government and have a better view of how those forms of government interact, the intersection of those forms of government and the people, as well as, the people's wish or wishes, as well as the people's wishes in terms of who governs them and what systems are used, to achieve that. Now, as the name suggests, this is total, right? Complete, meaning in power, right? Complete power, and authoritarian, meaning they have power as well, and authority. They have authority over the people, right? So these words are very, very suggestive. Totalitarian regimes are often characterized by extreme intolerance of opposition and political repression and human rights violations to a much greater extent than those of authoritarian regime. They are extremely intolerant to opposition, right? And political repression and human rights violations are more likely to occur under totalitarian form of government than authoritarian. Because this is really extreme, right? Take note of this. Totalitarian is extreme form of government. Authoritarian is terrible form of government because, again, the people's wishes are not adhered to. The people don't have a say, don't have a right, human rights are violated and so forth. But nevertheless, it's not as repressive as totalitarian. Totalitarian is where the ruler is really, the final arbiter, one person. And whatever the ruler says happens. It's a really total banana republic, so to speak, where the ruler is the final arbiter and everybody listens to the ruler. So the ruler is the judge, the jury, and the executioner concept. Right? So we have some examples today in the world where we have one ruler that has continuously oppressed the people, continuously in power, and dictating things to the people, and the economy is all concentrated in the hands of the government, right? So let's take note of that as well, right? So economic dominance, right? This is dominance and monopoly, right? So the government has monopoly on all aspects of government, on all aspects of the economy, be it in communication, be it in the financial markets, be it in the commerce, in any and all aspects of the government, of society. The government is pretty much in there and controls the citizens and brainwashes them and sometimes cuts them off from the world, right? And so that they can continue to manipulate them, etc. And the bar journalists and foreign interest from coming in. This is a very interesting form of government for us to understand because it is fundamental and inimical to progress. It is fundamental and inimical to democratic practice, where the people determine who their ruler is, and not a ruler saying, whether you like it or not, I will be the ruler. So here then we have sometimes military governments fall under this category. And sometimes, you can also find military government that have become authoritarian, right? So you can have the military. Let's get rid of this here. So you can have the military, right? This is the military, and it could be authoritarian, it could be totalitarian, depending on, of course, the officers in charge and their mindset and their ideology and their understanding of democracy and human rights and so forth. Very important form of government to understand because of how it impacts the citizens and how it impacts the quality of life of citizens and how it impacts the just human rights and the inalienable rights of citizens. Okay, next slide. So it says here, this is also characterized by lack of democratic credentials or practices, right? As we've already suggested, the rulers are often revered, called figures revered, not out of respect, but out of fear. This is also very important. They're revered not because they've done so much for the country, not because their citizens love them, not because they've earned the respect, but because of fear. The citizens, out of fear, respect them. That way they are not hurt, their families are not hurt. That way they can continue to go about their livelihood and so forth. They control every aspect of the economy with no room for ingenuity and entrepreneurship. This is very important. This is a very important characteristics and elements of this form of government. Please take note as we begin to understand the trajectory of this form of government within the context of governance and within the context of democracy, human rights, and other aspects of society, right? It's very important to understand this. So they control every aspect of the economy with no room for ingenuity and entrepreneurship. That is totalitarian and authoritarian forms of government. Next slide. Okay, so in conclusion then, we've looked at democratic governance, right? And one of the characteristics we said is the people. This is very important. The people are the base, the core of democratic government. We talked about monarchy, which is the royalty, kings and queens, right, in power. And usually this is inherited. So please take note of these keywords, right? This is inherited. And then we also talked about oligarchy, right? And this is noted by wealth, right? Wealth. And of course, we also talked about how they don't care for the needs of the people, right? So no care for the people, right? And they use the people because they own the factories. And this is where we have plutocracy, where the wealthy throw their wealth around and continue to leverage it in many ways in society. A very important point as well. When we talk about oligarchy, please take note of this, because you see this again as we move forward and talk about the different forms of government and begin to understand how those forms of government interact, and begin to understand the intersection of those forms of government with various aspects of society. All right, so totalitarian then is also known by oppressive tendencies, right? Violation of human rights, HR human rights. Of course, no election, leaders are not elected, right? And of course, cult-like figures are, evident in these types of government. So it's important again for us to understand this, have this foundational understanding. So it's important for us to have this foundational understanding of the different forms of government as we begin to look at nation-state existence, and begin to look at how governments mold and interact and influence the people. Depending on the type of government, you have a different set of people. Depending on the type of government, it will impact development, right? Will impact development, will impact relationships. This is very important. Relationships will also impact, of course, the economics, right? The economics of that country.